How's it going, people? Another quick one that kind of came from a comment. A friend of mine poked me on my message. This is getting really cool because it's like it really helps just develop the subjects and go a tad bit deeper into it. And I was really pressuring him to go on voice mic because typing about this thing is hell. It is because one, your fingers just continuously, and then the other part is there's no intonation to convey certain punctuations on concepts so that your mind can kind of get that on the emotional level, not just on the ones and zeros type of mind aspect that oftentimes texting does, because it's always kind of based on our every word is kind of based on our own definitions, and having a clear and consistent exchange does require, when it comes to those subject, a back and forth with the different kind of nuances and definitions that we have about certain words. So that being said, without further ado, let's talk straight up about non-duality. Let's like make another, maybe a much more deeper dive into it. And I'm gonna start with the initial intention that I had before that message, because it just fell synchronistically on the same day where I thought, okay, let me talk about that. But I'll get to that specific message, like that specific topic later on. But I'll start with an initial pillar, which is when it comes to non-duality, that maybe it is, maybe it isn't, could be this, could be that. It is the master key that can help you understand, various aspects within yourself. Yet, a best example is to say and show how religions, especially strict doctrines, old strict doctrines, can crash and burn because they do not necessarily have this balance of non-duality, of accepting and not accepting. Because here's the thing, especially when it comes to, I'm not pointing out any kind of religion, because even philosophy, any, even spirituality, any hardcore encoded thought reasoning, okay, or even living reasoning, okay, that sticks to one creed and says we cannot move away from this. If you do not follow this, then you are that, ones and zeros, ones and zeros. Anyone that follows that will stop evolving. And we've noticed when you stop evolving, you crash and you burn. You are destroyed. You are done. Let's take Christianity as an example, mostly because I was Christian for an amount of time. And notice throughout the years, okay, women's right, bam, out with Christianity because you were set a specific position. You are this or you are not with God. And of course, that causes separation, which is internal hurt because it's completely false. God is always with you. Doesn't matter what religion or who you are. And you can change the names. It really doesn't matter. But you understand, one strict name, one with God. You're a woman. You cannot do this. No, fuck off. Okay? And then black people, African Americans, Hispanics, any other religion. It was always you must, if you are this, then you're not with God. And of course, fuck that. And then later on, gays, homosexual, transes. Oh, well, you guys are sin. Even if God created you all, get the fuck out. So there's a large branch, and I'm not saying all of Christianity, but there's a large branch, and this kind of goes for all religion. As soon as an exception is made, and it's like an exception to live and let live, and God accepts all. As soon as an exception was spotted, okay, and made, and it's like it didn't evolve with the time of just, well, wait a minute, God created everyone, so why would he put exception? That wasn't on the tablet, you know? And you get a bit more into channeling and inner work, and you start following speakers, various other speakers that kind of get this channeling information like that. At first I found it weird, okay, because I still had that religious doctrine, kind of aspect of, I didn't necessarily want to go into that. It felt a tad bit weird, but after that I'm like, wait a minute, yeah, it's continuously evolving. As we evolve, our consciousness, our understandings of each other evolves. You don't set rules, even when it comes to the Tao at times will often refer to, okay, well, to follow the Tao, to follow this, to have one's life, to be a certain way, you must follow this. And it's like, it kind of hits itself with its own aspect, because it practices a bit of non-duality, but still says that you must follow these kind of rules to have a peaceful life. And there's multiple rules. There's multiple other rules that aren't in the Tao. So if a religion, a philosophy, even when it comes to motivational speakers, if it only sticks to one thing and there's no evolution, which is why I like people like Tony Robbins, Abraham Hicks, and all that. There's always an evolution. It is not, this is my technique, this is set, it is over. If you do not follow this one, then you are a zero. No, they continuously evolve and change. There's various other churches that do. I heard about something that's called a unity church, and I wasn't ready to kind of poke into that because I was kind of busy trying to figure things out on my side. But I hear that it lets its own ideas evolve. It lets its members evolve. It lets its community evolve. So, and it's much easier to let things evolve by understanding that all is created and all possibilities are created. So you might as well let yourself say, okay, well, maybe it's going to work for me or maybe it's not. You might as well always question your ideas of going, maybe it is this or maybe not, and allow yourself to expand, evolve, and change those ideas over time, because it's natural. Certain ideas will work for a certain situation and others may not. You may discover new nuances, and you may even discover new definitions, which will lead to even more different new nuances that you didn't figure out before. So you want to change, and you're allowed to change. The time of okay, two things. The time of people criticizing you for a change of opinion is kind of done. Done because you don't necessarily need to give a fuck about it, because it's always about one's self projection when it comes to the call out, crap, how do you call it? It's the call out scene, the call out habit, the call out wave that we had, that little criticism call out thing that some were doing with comedy. So that's cool, okay, with comedy. But some were just literally poking, finger pointing at people, not necessarily understanding, hey, you're the one perceiving that. It's within yourself, and the trigger is always within you. So why would I need to give a fuck about what your opinion is? And this is saying it in a harsh way in order to dissipate from the habit. When you go into non-duality, you kind of go, okay, well, I understand this is coming from your projection, maybe a pattern you didn't necessarily understand within yourself, nor did you see the momentum of thought that creates, as well as the momentum of habits, and how it gets you a momentum of feeling, which then creates a momentum of results, which, this person must be like that, or all people must be like this, and this must be like that. And look at how it's going to affect your life, because eventually you keep trailing on this kind of pattern. If you stay dead set along your life, just like philosophy, just like religion, you stay dead set in one way, one method, one way of seeing yourself, one way of seeing others, GG, game over. Because you eventually hit a point that your path kind of splits in two. You hit something, you hit a repetition of something that just keeps telling you, wait, it may be something else, it may be something else. You keep going one way, but it's like, hey, wait, maybe it's something else, maybe it's something else. And you kind of go, you can go two way. You can either feel so fucking miserable about yourself, because then the mind attacks you by saying, oh, you were wrong. But you weren't wrong. You just didn't know the consequences of all that. You didn't understand even the internal pattern of sticking to one point, because it can be an internal pattern based on your initial indoctrination, which unfortunately they did not understand, because guess what? They were trained the same way. So that's one pattern. The other pattern is you grow bitter and resentful over everyone else, because you're like, oh, that person's exception? Fuck that. It must be like that overall. And then you go even further into that one way, one method of seeing things, which then ultimately fucks with you because life pattern, again, it affects your mood. So bring up that anxiety over whatever little nuances that the mind kind of wants to stick to it. And always remember, it's the mind. I want to try to integrate that into my dialogue a bit more, just precising these habits as the mind, these habits as, pointing the stupid as the habit is stupid, not the person. Because again, there's conscious and unconscious decision, and when you understand what the full extent of a conscious decision, which also means being able to see 10 steps ahead of your repeated pattern of thought and assessment, as well as intuitions to a certain degree, then you will take conscious control, and you can do that with a bit more ease if you do retrospection without judging yourself. And again, it's a challenge, but we are getting to that point. We're already starting to understand this. If you get this, you get this, and you're not going to be a jaded, resentful person that will continue their pattern needing to be right because I need to be right to a point where I don't want to change. And anybody that kind of shows me the exception to what I'm judging about certain kind of people, anyone like that, fuck him. They're not exception. Hate them. They must be doing that. And then guess what? You keep rolling those patterns. Anxiety within, it does fuck with your cells. And then what else happens is you miss out on opportunities of bliss and joy and happiness because there's certain meetings that you could have made that will just change you in that moment, But again, I do hope that the aspect of at least seeing that the mind is doing this, okay? And that you can choose can help you with this. And here's where things kind of loop around because, again, especially in the scenario of keeping those scenarios happening or keeping that train of thought, let's say based on other people or certain things, okay? Keeping that train of thought going, just brute forcing it continuously. You also kind of notice that it's always an aspect of what's going on out there and not reflecting back in there to understand what's being projected. Again, the lens, the hard drive, the projector. So it's not necessarily, again, it's kind of like having a blindfold because you never really look within to understand that the initial trigger is how we think. Maybe it's in relationship to something that happened in the past that left an imprint, okay? And maybe it's something that's just never really questioned. Maybe it's something that we ingested on media continuously. We're bombarded by this information, which is, let's say for the news, which is the reporter's own projection of an event that happened to people without their context leading up to it. And this is where you kind of get to understand gossip, news, media, they bring minimal context to a human being's movement towards an event that happened. And that's why at times I do want to call it a waste of time. Because why would I need to, and before, let's say I'm back in a context where I don't necessarily understand all this and I have no reaction of, no conscious reaction and gauging of my emotions, okay? Why would I want to be triggered, have an emotional reaction for someone else's event, but in the now while I'm listening to it and not taking part of it? This little nugget I want to put a bit more in a video that'll explain how we unconsciously started picking up the habit of continuously feeling the exterior events as if they were related to us. I spoke a bit about it in the aspect of movie and television, but it is an unfortunate passed down pattern that kind of leads us to have like this this natural connection with others, yet often pushed a bit too far. you're going into over compassion instead of balancing it with wisdom to kind of go, well, wait, I'm not part of this event and I have no idea of the context. So why am I taking this one person that's outside of this event's his perception, his reasoning, his understanding of that context, while I know I literally know nothing about it. Plus, I feel whatever the event tells me or resonates in me while I'm not even there. And then that shit's repeated over and over and over. It's like, well, no. You kind of move away from habits of judgment, because when it comes to news, it's like, all right, look, this person's done that and blah, blah, blah. No context. So you're like, okay, well, maybe they're like this, maybe they're like that. You could also, if you're really agile at this and understanding non-duality, you can also see both sides of what could possibly have happened within one person and within another, and kind of understand the collision. What you gain and learn from this is understanding what traps are in us when it comes to the mind, or could potentially be in us, in a sense. All right, if a person, let's say, example, TMZ, people just literally fighting, over the littlest thing. Well, you can kind of understand, okay, well, if you're too much in the mind in, let's say, situation XYZ, then you may feel offended by somebody saying something, just a little comment that may not necessarily even be reflective of you, but you may get so triggered that you'll go out there with a baseball bat and break their car. And then here's the consequences. You're going to be known as that. The police might arrest you. You're going to lose a lot of money because you got to pay a fine. You might get other people against you, depending if you're reacting to somebody that's already reactionary. And that person's might just bring their whole crew. And you might just lose a limb. Or you might, again, you start seeing the consequences of being too much in the mind leading to reactionary. So that you would only want to do if you kind of have somewhat of a grasp, not a total grasp. But if you understand some of these concepts of non-duality, you can look at these things not out of entertainment, but just out of an aspect of understanding. And after that, you're not going to spend too much time on it, because you understand, oh, right, in the mind, in the mind, in the mind. And you're not necessarily going to grow more from that kind of gossip, drama, and bullshit, because it's not really growing. It shows you, it helps you grow in one way, it is and it isn't. It helps you grow in one way where you understand some of the pitfalls. But after you've seen most of the general pitfalls, you're going to let it go. And you're not going to grow from it anymore. You're like, okay, that's past that. You've already got to next level. You've already got to Super Saiyan level, That was like base Krillin level. Base Krillin level. No, Krillin got much stronger. I think that's a Yamcha level. No, that's a Pilaf level. Just, I need to get this, I need to get revenge. I need to have my identity justified. I need to have this other person know that they can't fuck with me. Like, the need. You notice that. That's base Pilaf. That's why he's no longer really in the series. That's why GT got retconned. But you kind of understand. You get to another level of your own thoughts, your own acceptance by understanding all this, and you let go. You understand why they happen, so you don't necessarily judge them, even though base Pilaf is a bit of a judgment, but it's just comedic at this point. But you let go, and you kind of wish them well, because oftentimes you literally understand how we do not necessarily choose these actions and these ways of thinking. If we knew the 10 steps ahead, what would happen after? Because if you're going out there with a baseball bat and you kind of don't acknowledge what's going to happen 10 steps ahead, well, you're going to find out really fast. And this, again, the indirect habit that we have for that connection to these events, while not even being in them, and not even having the context, and not even living them in the moment, that's going to be another video. It's indirectly linked to parenting, and again, I'm going to... that video is going to be like making my peace with parenting, because it's understanding. There's so much more complex and nuance and in that I want to dive a bit deeper into it, not to just say, oh, parenting, blah, blah, blah. And even with the understanding that, they've been taught that way by other people that have been taught that way, there's much more deeper nuances to that I kind of realize now that would be fun to go into, just to kind of make peace with it. and use it as a fun playground as well. And on top of that, because I gotta say shout out to Dawn for again this topic. On top of that, it brings another topic, another video that's going to be made about the repetition of thought and how it creates belief, which then also creates your own personal bubble of reality. Because that is also an important thing where before we kind of understood this whole non-duality thing and found kind of like an interesting center of balance, not saying total neutral, but a very interesting center of balance because you allow yourself to shift right and left instead of saying one doctrine, one method, one, and then, just dying off afterward, or not accomplishing what you really love, because there's also that effect as well. There are ways to, and depending on the indoctrination, the environment that we had, or even the things we continuously repeat and ingest, that will create and impact your lens, your hard drive, your projector. And repeating these things over and over and over does affect your perception, your creation of reality, because you do create that. But longer explanation, I'm not going to leave it to a general state because there's a very cool and interesting explanation that there is for that. And it's not, you popping things like Doctor Strange, It is something much more technical and to a certain degree simple after you catch that, and I'll try to put it as general as I can, but it is super cool once you understand that and how how you can create different momentums like that versus running off a momentum that you didn't necessarily choose and then getting the consequences of said momentum on your life, on your body, on your ideas, on your projects, on the things that you encounter. It is super cool once you start to kind of grasp that, and that's why it's getting a video on its own. But yeah, non-duality really helps you just gauge all this as well as your own personal activities. If you love doing art or singing or any kind of activity, you learn it for the first time, or you learn a specific technique, you're not going to stay to that one technique because maybe it'll work for certain situations and maybe it won't. And the more you start diving into that and you allow yourself to dive into the nuance, it's kind of like going back to the pro-life equation. The more you allow yourself to float in between the various structures and techniques that you see and the various conclusions, because you'll find one technique works with one thing and may not work under different kind of scenarios. And the more you kind of get those nuance consciously, but playfully. Again, consciously, playfully. The more you're able to tap into the flow state and allow yourself to go into that, and it just becomes a dance. It just becomes an amazing martial art choreography because you're kind of like, yeah, I can allow myself to bob and weave to the various techniques and understandings that I have in my craft. The same goes in life because ultimately it always comes from the projection, unless you're doing channeling, and even then the projector is a filter. So as we go through life, we clean up the filter, we clean up the hard drive, we clean up the hard drive folder, we clean up the lens of, let's say, biases that we may have kept and not necessarily chosen, knowing what would happen 10 steps ahead. If in art you stick to one technique, one method, that's it, that's all, well then you're not necessarily going to grow, you're not necessarily going to evolve, you're going to find pitfalls of that specific techniques, and you're not necessarily wanting yourself to move out of that technique because you want to be right. And you see, ones and zero, right, wrong, and again, just like religion, you hinder your own life. Well, you do and you don't, mostly because it's the mind. You see, I want to add that into the dialogue. Your mind hinders your own life, in a sense, or you subconsciously do so because of your mind, because you didn't necessarily realize it. It's always realizing there's conscious and unconscious choice, and conscious and unconscious understanding of said choice. You may take a conscious choice, but not necessarily understand the consequences, which makes your understanding of the consequences subconscious or unconscious, not subconscious, unconscious. So that's why this kind of topic, you just play and love diving into those nuances. That maybe it is, maybe it isn't. What if it was? What if it wasn't? And you start noticing the different pathways that are created by the different understanding and choice, as well as visions of things. And at that point, again, cheat. Tell your mind that it's going to get more control if you allow yourself to dive into those subjects without feeling involved, without feeling this emotional resonance, without letting the habit of feeling triggered by those, and you will just open up Pandora's box of amazing possibilities and nuances that you can then use to better your life, to better your craft, to better your relationship with everyone else. And fully understanding that when you clean off the projector, okay, the hard drive and everything, since that shit is internal, it won't project it back outside. You will come to an understanding of the reactionary aspect of certain people. And at that point, you will let it go. Because you won't see them as evil. You won't see them as wrong. You won't see them as false. Because guess what? That always comes from within. So you're still working with ones and zeros. Oh, this person doing this? That is wrong. Are they conscious or unconscious of it? Are they conscious of their actions? Are they conscious of the consequences? Are you? You start going into that and you notice, oh shit, quick finger pointing. No es bueno. Because you don't get any kind of nuances and understandings of that. The quick judgment aspect always reflects back to you. And yeah, it's a challenge. It literally is. It's a challenge. But you already have the key. Cheat. Ask yourself, what if I already passed that? What if I already understood this? What if it was me? Always bounce the mirror, but then ask better questions. The key to it, or another big ass key, is the better your questions, the better your nuances and understandings. The better your questions, the better your results, which are nuances and understanding, the better you're going to feel, because you're going to feel like you've grown. And again, you've learned. Boom. You felt that growth, you've learned. So play with that. It's kind of like understanding that better question. Let's define that even more. Better question would be having that kind of aspect of sticking in non-duality, but also reflecting it back onto yourself. Or another definition would be, a better question would be something that would make you grow. So how would this, it's like questionception, but it's kind of like going, what kind of question would make me grow in this specific situation or about this specific situation? And then you'll ask yourself, okay, well, what is growth? What would be growth in this situation? Would it be taking a baseball bat and fucking smashing? Or would it be coming to a point of just understanding of others, which would lead to a point of understanding yourself? Or then vice versa. It's always from the projector, right? We all started from that initial brain, and some of the functions and mechanic are relatively the same. How we learn, how we get certain habits, how those habits are perpetuated, and how we can use the very same momentums and tricks. I won't say tricks, but the same momentum and various other techniques to do the same thing and improve and better our lives. It's just taking the time to make that retrospection, or just taking the time to get this personal word jargon to understand and get much more of a clear view of your own projector, to then look at some of the spots that you wouldn't necessarily want to apply on yourself, or wouldn't really like if somebody applied the same way to you. Then you clean it up. It takes the time it takes, and that's why no notification, no fucking movies, nothing to distract you. But it doesn't mean that you need to go hermit. It's a thing that you do in bursts of time. Balance, non-duality. You gotta have that compassion, but you also gotta have that wisdom and find a way to balance it without going to the two extremes, as I explained it before. And it becomes a game. It literally becomes a game, because you don't need to get it perfectly right. You'll have fun learning and tripping, and then catching yourself and going, oh wow, you won't say I fucked up, Oh, because that's another thing. You gotta. That's another thing. Gotta watch out for the internal dialogue or some of the terminologies. I wanted to make. I'm gonna bind that to the whole video about creating your own reality because, yeah, depending on how you talk to yourself, but you talk in general, you can spot certain things about patterns that you've been repeated. But anyway, this was long enough. Don, that was top notch. I hope this kind of answered your question. But funny enough, maybe it didn't because this springs into two other big ass videos that I'm going to take some water and just get into soon. Thank you guys.